Hi, this is Doug Bradley, Pinhead from the Hellraiser movies, and you are listening to Without Your Head. And you'd better keep listening to Without Your Head, or you will not only be without your head, you will be without your soul, because I will tear it apart.
All right, and welcome to the Station of Decapitation Without Your Head. I'm Nasty Neil Jones.
This is Annabelle Lecter.
Yes, and we are very proud to be joined by author and filmmaker Robin Hardy. So, you have a new film that we're going to be talking about. Well, hopefully a new film. Wrath of the Gods. You might correct us on the pronunciation of that. But before we get into that, which we definitely will, we would like to talk a little bit about Wicker Man, which both of us are huge fans of. And did you, was it an instant, cult classic, and has it grown over time? And why do you think it keeps finding new audiences?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons for that. When it was first made, it had a rather checkered career, as you know, in the UK, because it was the subject of a boardroom battle at British Lion, its production company. But that eventually settled down to it being released as a second feature to Don't Look Now, which is another film that they had produced that year. A very good film, by the way, I think. Mm-hmm. But I felt that since I was going back to the United States anyway to continue a career in television that I'd had for almost a decade before, that it would be an opportunity to distribute the picture there, with or without the permission of the powers that be in London, and as it turned out, the legal permission to do that was forthcoming, and we were able to find a group who wanted, as a college project, to release it, and so that was actually very interesting for me, because I'd never worked with students like that before. Their professor had given it to them, having read reviews about the film in the Cinefantastique film magazine in America, and having seen it and being impressed with it, thought it was the perfect project for them to learn about marketing and distribution, as it then was in the U.S., through a series of sub-distributors who were scattered all over the country. And the film was shown at Telluride. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing that right, Telluride. And lots of distributors were there who, as I say, the sub-distributors that actually handle the cinemas around the U.S., and they were keen to get it. So the students were extremely efficient at raising money. The usual tack in those days in America seemed to be the doctors and the dentists. We gave huge numbers of screenings for doctors and dentists in New Jersey and Long Island and elsewhere, and the money was available for the distribution through that means. It was also available for my being able to repair the damage that the producers in London had done to the film in trying to make it short enough to send out as a second feature. Because in those days, double features, the main feature had to be longer than the second feature, so it had to be butchered a bit, the second feature, in order to fit. And that had been done to the Wicker Man. Repair of the film, as to say the restoration of it, was a bit of a problem, because the London company wouldn't give us the negative, claimed that they'd lost it, which obviously was not true. You never lose negative of a feature. And nevertheless, we had to restore it with something, and we got a very good condition print, which had been sent as an example of the film a few months earlier. and we restored it from the print. We went through various internegatives. It would have been incredibly easy to do today, obviously. In those days, it was a very laborious business, and we had to use a system called the liquid gate system, which literally meant dealing with every single frame to restore the scenes that we wanted to restore. The result was that we had a print of the film, a version of the film, which was unique to the United States. And this is partly to answer your question. As a result, and due to the enthusiasm of the young group who were helping us to distribute it, we were able to then take it on a tour with which Christopher Lee joined us. And the wonderful thing about the United States in those days, and it's probably true today, was that every college town, and indeed every city, had college radio programs, stations, had college newspapers, all of them sitting there waiting for some material to come in which they could use. And the fact that Christopher Lee was well known from the Hammer films meant that they had an instantaneous star on which to hang the interviews, articles. And so on that basis, we started in San Francisco, where we opened at the Castro Theater. The Castro Theater is in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. And we had a benefit there in favor of the Cinematheque. And the film had very, very good reviews. It then went on to run at the Lumiere there, which I think it broke the highest record. We then went on and on to other cities. And when we got to Boston, we went to the Orson Welles cinema there, theater there. And again, we broke the highest record and got some extremely nice reviews, which I have always treasured from the Globe, the Boston Globe. And so it was that, I suppose, a fairly varied audience in the United States saw The Wicker Man, and it then went on to its television life, and ultimately to its video life, and then to its DVD life in the United States. Meanwhile, back in the UK, it was still being shown in its butchered state. British audiences didn't see it the way American audiences had seen it until well into the 90s. And at that time, I was asked to help restore it. And we got it back, the British version, pretty much the same as the American version. It started being taught as a kind of genre film in colleges, and it became a class given film for film studies in British high schools as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, rather the way Pride and Prejudice might be given, for the English lit. And so you had here, at any rate, an audience that had seen it at age 14 or 15, and now only in their early 20s, right back to an audience which had seen it way back in the 70s. This is a pretty big span. In the meantime, it had a great deal of television coverage in both North America and the UK. That answers your question.
Definitely.
My question for you now is, you're saying that people in the UK didn't get the full release, but I know we've also heard, I think even in this just past year, of found footage, and we were lucky enough to go to a theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, to be able to see that. So what version did British people see originally? Were there other scenes that had been cut out aside from this lost footage?
Well, the purpose of the cutting, you see, was in order to make it possible to distribute as a second feature. Because, as I said, there is this question, when they had double feature releases, the amount of time spent on the second feature was to some extent governed by how long the first feature was. Mm-hmm. And it was cut down to whatever it was cut down to, literally for that purpose.
Were they two separate cuts, though? There was lost footage that was recently, within the past year, uncovered.
Considered the final cut.
The final cut, I cut that, yes. Mm-hmm.
And
about 18 months ago, yeah.
So what was missing? So Neil and I have seen that version. So we've seen those deleted scenes.
The main thing to bear in mind as far as this is concerned is that the film is designed to have 2 nights and 2 days. Mm-hmm. So he arrives on the first day on his plane, and that night he goes up to bed after all the shenanigans in the bar, and he hears things going on in the garden, and he looks out his window and he sees Christopher. That was completely cut out by the British production company, the whole of that, and that rather lovely song, at least I think it's lovely, Gently Johnny, which is a sort of love song which is sung by Paul Giovanni in the downstairs bar, while the young McGregor is being given his tutorial by Britt Ekland upstairs. That all goes, and so the Willow dance is then put on to the second night. So having been the second night becomes the first night in the recut. So you've lost really 12 hours of the 48-hour period. Mm-hmm. There probably have been minor cuts otherwise. One of them, I think, was that in the scene where Howie meets with Christopher Lee at in his palace, and Christopher Lee takes him out into the garden and introduces him to the apples. Well, Tony Shaffer and I had a lot, we thought quite funny actually at the time, endlessly, almost boring dissertation on apples. And pippins and all those sort of breeds of apples, which Christopher talked about endlessly in that scene. It wasn't wrong to cut that. It was silly to have it in the first place. So that was a justified cut. Christopher has always, I keep on forgetting that he's not with us anymore, always been rather fond of the sequence, because it was quite a difficult one to learn with all these arcane names of apples. But I think he agreed that it really was not necessary, to say the least, to the plot. So that is yet another thing that he always talks about having lost. When he talks about having 20 minutes cuts, there weren't 20 minutes cuts. Well, there might have been 5 minutes there. The best is that first night.
But for him, it probably felt like 20 minutes of going on and on about apples.
Yes, it did. At least.
How frustrating is that? What was that for you? Because you said it wasn't until the 90s that the cut that you wanted was in the UK. Especially that's your home. 20 years later, your work is finally shown how you wanted it to be. How frustrating was that? Those 20 years.
More than half my working life has been spent in the United States. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't really as aware of it as I might otherwise have been.
Okay.
I saw the film in its proper state on television from time to time in the U.S. It was a fairly regular feature on television during the 80s and early 90s when I was still working in the U.S. So I wasn't all that aware of it. And then, of course, whenever there were special screenings of the Wicker Man in the UK, they showed the American version, because there was still discussion about whether the thing should be further restored. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I don't think it was a big issue for me.
Mm.
That's really interesting that you mentioned watching your own movie, because we've interviewed many people and they say, oh, they never watch their own movies, or they saw it at a screening and that was the end. What experience is it to watch The Wicker Man or others of your films?
Well, I rather like it because I think it's like watching something you've done in the theatre. You wait to see whether that particular part gets a laugh or not, mm-hmm. Or that part gets a kind of collective shiver from the audience. The Wicker Man, like others of my films, are often quite funny, and one appreciates hearing the laugh. So I quite enjoy watching my films.
And even at home, you still like to watch them?
Well, I don't do it very often.
Well, you mentioned that they come up. Some people just avoid it. Well, some people just seem to entirely avoid their own films after.
Yes, that's true. Well, I get in recent years, because they sort of, if you like, the cult of the Wicker Man and has become a kind of cult in some areas, means that I get quite often invited to festivals or special screenings here or in other parts of Western Europe. Sometimes my wife and I go simply because it's a city we don't know. We haven't seen Bruges, for instance, before, and we wanted to see it, and so we go to a screening. And I don't mind watching it there. And of course I have to do a Q&A about it afterwards, so I'm reminded of things I can say in answer to questions and so on.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the many things I like about the movie is obviously Christopher Lee, but I like that that his character, you don't really spell it out that he's what he really believes. If he really believes that sacrificing the guy is going to help, or if he's really just manipulating all these people. When I watch it, that's what I get from it. But I like that it's not spelled out and it leaves it up to the audience to decide what they think.
Very ambiguous, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And do you think that's kind of lost in storytelling in modern day, where they don't leave it necessarily up to the audience? It's kind of, they really have to spell it out for you, what the motivation is of every character.
Well, I think that is quite often the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in films like The Wicker Man, there's a great deal of irony, ironical dialogue, which is, hinting at things that are not necessarily out in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the interesting things is the degree to which people, either in the UK or the US, realize that the whole film is a game.
Mm.
That the clues are all the way through the film in the performances of the other actors and in props, which are hidden in plain sight. They all speak of a pagan world and a pagan religion and a pagan relationship between people, and right from the beginning, the fact that all the people are called by plants or flower names is just one tiny clue of where we're going. Mm-hmm. But there are lots of others all the way through. I've often wondered whether we should have made the fact that was happening clearer to the audience so that they join in that. I mean, many of them will join in the game anyway, because they get it, as it were. but it might have been a good idea to help them with that.
Well, I think that helps it with repeat viewing, because you can watch it for the first time not really knowing what it's about, and then the whole ending, everything is going to be more of a surprise. And then once you know what the movie's about, you can watch it again, and you pick up all the little clues, just even little looks from the different
That's true. I
characters.
mean, it helps make the film repeatable, I agree.
Yeah.
I also think that as far as commercial success, yeah, that probably would have been the way to go. But I think part of the reason it has this cult following and that the people that like it love it so much is because you know that you're in on the joke. You know that you see this and you know that you're getting it, and that's part of the pleasure of watching it.
Yes, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. If you do.
Yeah, well, Annabelle brought up that we got to see the final cut, which I know you can get on Blu-ray, but we got to see it at a screening here in Cambridge, which is near Boston, and it was amazing to see it on the big screen. And I know that took so long, and you used the internet to try to find the lost footage. And how important was the internet in finding that?
Well, most of the lost footage was part of that print of which I mentioned to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because plenty of prints were made of the original film, because they were sent out in normal course of events to distributors to see if they were interested in distributing it. And some of them kept those prints, and some of them didn't. I'm trying to remember the name of the very famous producer in L.A. at the time, a B-picture producer. He was the one who had the print that we used, because it had only been screened, I think, once. And it was without scratches and things. But that's the main source of the restoration. Otherwise, it's really just finding parts of the original film and restoring a cut here and a cut there. But as I said before, I think the restoration of the first night is the all-important thing, because if you come to think of it, at the moment, if you don't have that first night, you don't see Christopher Lee until two-thirds of the way through the film. Mm-hmm. When Harry goes and visits him at his palace. Mm-hmm. You haven't seen him before at all. Whereas he's made his presence known very much so in this rather... we worked very hard to make that a beautiful and atmospheric scene. As I say, it has this wonderful love song in Gently Johnny, and a terrific performance from Christopher Lee in the garden, where he's being at his most poetic. He liked being poetic. He made a change from biting people in the neck.
Yeah. Well, obviously, music is so memorable, and I also think, in a way, it makes the movie timeless, because it's not necessarily music from that time, from that era. So you could watch it, in any era, and it just seems so weird. But who picked the music for the movie? How did all the music come about?
Well, Paul Giovanni, who was the composer, was an American composer, director, writer, who was a very close friend of Peter Shaffer, the playwright, who was twin brother to Anthony, who wrote the screenplay of The Wicker Man. Mm-hmm. Peter Shaffer, you'll probably know from films like Amadeus and White Lies and all sorts of other plays. He's been enormously successful for a number of decades on Broadway and in the West End of London. When we started to make the film, Tony Shepard, who was the screenplay and who had been my partner in business for 15 years, was summoned by Hitchcock to go and write a film called Frenzy, which Hitchcock later made in London. And so we hardly saw Anthony Shaffer during the shoot. But his twin brother, Peter, stayed behind, and anything I wanted to know about the screenplay or change in the screenplay as I was directing the film, I simply went to Peter. I'm not suggesting that, of course, just because they were twins, they were like-minded, but they certainly had a very strong affinity for what had been written.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul Giovanni, an Italian-American who had done quite a lot of musicals in the U.S., he did a very good Twelfth Night, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, as a musical. It makes a very good musical, by the way. And I had done the research for the songs at a research center here, which goes right back to the Victorian era, and delivered him probably several dozen folk songs, which had actually had the rather sort of rude bits taken out in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. Because Queen Victoria was extremely keen on Celtic folk songs. And when the sort of definitive book on them was delivered to her, it had been bowdlerized. In other words, we in England call them saucy bits had been taken out. Peter Shaffer then restored all these, and his friend Giovanni wrote the music for the restored lyrics, and that's where the landlord's daughter and all that comes back to life.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking about music, I do have to say that there's a piece of music near the end in the chase scene, and that is modern. And why? I've always been curious to know.
It's very perceptive of you. I'm very glad you mentioned that. I had an enormous row with the producers who butchered the film, and of course that was typical of them. Mm-hmm. They wanted a piece of classic horror film music, and they forced me to allow that to be put in. Mm. It was, one of the usual trade-offs that we'll let you keep this provided you have that there. Mm-hmm. And they didn't understand one single thing about the film. They didn't know what it was about. They thought it was ludicrously strange and totally un-mainstream by English or American standards. And so they were quite happy to shove that nasty piece of electronic music in there. And
that's a real shame. It does have a huge impact because you're going along and you're so into it, and then there's that, and it totally doesn't fit. I wasn't going to be, try to be offensive when I said it, but obviously you feel exactly the same. It is a real shame.
In our review of the film, Annabelle, that's her one negative of the whole movie.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to hear that. I mean, I suppose I should have removed it later, but there were so many things that I was fighting to keep or restore that somehow that got missed.
Yeah. Did you have a piece of music that was intended for that scene?
No, we would have used some creepy, frightening folk music. I mean, most of the music in it is folk of one kind or another. Mm-hmm. I mean, Robert Burns, the famous Scottish poet, we use his lyrics in a number of the songs. I mean, Corn Rigs, the song which is sung while they're flying over the island of Skye there, is, I'm pretty sure, Robbie Burns. Gently Johnny is Robbie Burns, I think, and so on. But there is this extraordinary collection of folk songs. The interesting thing is, too, perhaps from your point of view, is that nearly all these songs in the 17th century went over the Atlantic and ended up in the U.S. in the Appalachians and places like that, where they the version slowly changed, rather like I remember going on a hunt for original flowers, which the early settlers had brought over to England, and which had mutated into different looking flowers in the 4th century since. It was rather like that with some of the Appalachian music. There were no, how can I say, newly written folk songs. They were all original. It was only the melodies which were changed or developed by Paul Giovanni.
Christopher Lee has done, like, I don't know, hundreds of films, really, and in so many interviews, he would always bring up Wicker Man as being one that he's really proud of, or his favorite film, and how did that make you feel as, the creator of the movie?
Well, it makes me feel very pleased. Have you seen, I thought we'd sent you the video.
You did. Yes.
Tribute to him.
Yeah, it's a beautiful tribute to Christopher Lee.
And he does it at the end of that, doesn't he? At the end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When he's addressing an audience somewhere.
Mm-hmm. At like a convention, I believe.
Yeah. Well, it's all. I think the thing is that after the years of doing a very stereotyped but successful role as Dracula or that sort of role, it was a great delight to him to be released to play people with, how can I say, released personalities, people who could be bit sinister one moment and funny the next, which certainly wasn't true of Dracula. I think that turn in his career came with The Wicker Man, and as a result he was perhaps grateful to the film for that reason.
How did you end up having Christopher Lee get involved in the film? And Britt Ekland as well. They're both well known. How did these people come to be in your film?
Well, I mean, Christopher Lee was literally because we thought that to give him a chance, glamorous figure that he was in his way, to play a proper glamorous figure instead of this slightly cliched role that he'd been playing. We thought that he would welcome that. And when we showed him the script, he did immediately welcome it. But I think that's something which you do in casting quite often. You look around at artists whom you admire, and you say, I bet he or she would like to do this, because it's so different from what he or she has been doing. And usually you're right. Usually they don't.
Yeah.
And now Christopher Lee was in the second one, Wicker Tree.
Yes.
And was he aware at all that you were planning on doing a third movie?
Yes, he was. I was talking to him about it only 3 weeks ago. With a view to his doing a cameo in it. Unfortunately, he didn't make it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the wrath. Now, we say Wrath of Gods. Is that just our American accent?
Well, I say my accent is just one of, as yours is probably one of many American accents.
That's very true. Very true.
Mine is one of many British accents, and I say Rolf. But I don't say Borf.
You're not going to take a bath?
No.
So, Wrath of Gods will
no, actually, I do take a bath, actually, that's why I take it.
Fair enough. It's somewhere in the middle.
Wrath of Gods, a planned third film in the trilogy, the Wicker Man trilogy. And what made you decide? What even really made you decide to do the second one? Because it was so long after the first one.
Well, I'd always wanted to do that. I had been spending some time in Texas, where they have this religion, Cowboys of Christ. And I was very intrigued by that.
That was going to be your original title, I believe, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And I wrote a novel called Cowboys of Christ. And this religion, which is actually very much like the religion practiced in black Baptist churches, where there are a lot of responses from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Rather the way we heard when the president sang Amazing Grace the other day. Those kind of responses that you could hear coming from the congregation. There was a lot of that in the Cowboys for Christ churches, although they were almost universally white. And so I was intrigued by them, and I wanted to do a story about a singer who went through the kind of mill that a lot of your young singers do go through, starting and singing in church and then moving on with their mommy or daddy as their agent, taking anything up to 50%, and ending up as I suppose you call them pop stars. Mm-hmm. You can think of quite a few in the last few decades whose life was like that. I just thought it would amuse me to interest me to write a novel on that basis, and it occurred to me that the religious dimension, I could make it a kind of, from the point of view of the content, not of the story, but of the content, a kind of sequel to the Wicker Man. And so I wrote it with that in mind.
Mm-hmm. So, when did the idea of doing a third one, The Wrath of Gods, come about?
Well, not long after we finished the Wicker Tree. I enjoyed making the Wicker Tree very much, and I quite like working in Scotland. I thought, with all this invocation of the gods, it would be intriguing to make a film where the gods themselves are much more prominent. The gods in this new film will talk to us through thunder and lightning and volcanoes and tsunamis and all the dreadful natural horrors that nature can visit on us, embodying their wrath. Mm-hmm. And I like that idea, and I like that idea of doing that in film. Not only because I like to shoot a lot of that stuff, but an enormous amount of wonderful footage exists that could be put to use in such a film. Mm-hmm. I also like the idea of having a big company, rather like the Mouse House, Disney or Universal, going to a country about which they knew really nothing, and presuming, if you like, to do a complete theme park based on their religion. Or, of course, it's all fairy tales mm-hmm. to some and religion to others. The gods who are getting angry about all this is very much religion, their religion. And to the people who are setting up the theme park, who are glad to have icons like gods and goddesses and giants and elves, it's just a whole set of new figures that could be marketed, in little effigies or however, mm-hmm. or made cartoon characters of. And so I thought that was an interesting story, on which to base a film in which had the gods on the one hand and the intrepid theme park guys on the other. I mean, it's a little. This is far-fetched in comparison, but when we and the Americans, say we, the British and the Americans, went into Iraq, we knew absolutely nothing about their culture or their religion or anything, and still don't very much. And look what's happened.
Yeah.
Of course, we actually are more to blame than the Americans in that particular instance, because we'd actually created Iraq in the first place. We drew the frontiers of it back in 1922, and we put all those people who don't get on very well together into one country because it was convenient for us at that time. But the moral is the same. You can't go careering into countries you know nothing about, or very little about, without getting rather rude consequences. And the theme park people do get rather rude consequences from the gods.
Amazing. I really like that whole setup. It's and really it's a lot of, I think people, especially how you explain that, you can relate to that, because really a lot of those old stories to us are just stories, but at one time they were someone's religion. Yes.
Well, and they still are. In Iceland, like in many European countries, they have some kind of, I think they have this in Iceland as well, tax arrangement, so that if you're a registered Protestant of some denomination, you pay whatever it is, $5 every month or $3 every month, and through your registration it goes to your particular denomination. If you're a Catholic, it goes to Catholics and so on. And they actually, on their list of religions, have their own ancient pagan religion, and it has, I think it has a temple as well in Iceland. And also they have areas around Reykjavik, the capital, and you can get a map to see where these areas are, where they believe that people we might call fairies live. And you don't go there, walking about in their place. You politely avoid it, and you can get a map in Reykjavik to tell you where they are. If you're going into a park or some fields, you'll know that you rather avoid that particular area because the fairy is living there. They don't call them fairies; they call them something else. Obviously, Icelandic.
Now, this has been a theme of yours, in your work. Is this something that you've always been interested in?
I'm very interested in comparative religion. I'm not religious myself, but I'm very interested in comparative religion, yes. I'm interested in how the ancient religions of the Celts and the Germans have influenced Christianity, for instance. I mean, it's all over the place. It's the days of the week, the months of the year. It's in Christmas. It's in Easter. You can see it everywhere. And we don't particularly recognize it because we're so used to it. And its symbolism is changed because it has a Christian or a Jewish or whatever new symbolism. But that is, I find, very interesting.
You'd mentioned that Iceland has a temple. Now, is that a revival of that belief system?
Please don't call it a temple, because I don't know what they call it.
Oh, okay.
They have a place of worship.
All right. So I'll rephrase. I'll start.
Which has to do with their old gods' religion, the Norse gods they're called, and they're RSE. That's And it was in Iceland that this happened in probably about the 11th century. And Iceland had only been populated largely by Norwegians 100 years before that. But one of the, and then it probably had a population of a few 100,000. It only has a population of 300,000 now. And one of the chiefs of the population then was a man called Snorri Sturluson. And he made an incredible journey all the way down to France and up the Seine River to Paris, where he studied under the great teacher Abelard, who is known in Romantic literature as the Abelard of Eloise and Abelard. Eloise was a nun, and Abelard, I don't know, perhaps he was a priest, I don't know. But anyway, this Snorri Sturluson studied under them, and then went all the way back down the river and up through the Thames and the North Sea and across the Atlantic to Iceland, where he sat down and wrote a great book about the sagas of the Norse gods, which he probably heard, at his father's and mother's campfire. And it was part of the oral tradition of the Icelandic people. And he wrote this book, and this is a really extraordinary thing. He wrote it as a poetry primer. If you would imagine somebody coming to America from England and deciding to write about what the English believed, and doing one chapter in iambic pentameter, the next one in blank verse, in order to teach how to write poetry. You have something similar to what he did.
I'd wanted to mention, now you talked about being interested in comparative religion, and you're obviously, you know a lot. You have all this information about Iceland, and it is your movies. This is what you've been doing. But in both these films, you have these, they're not necessarily the antagonists, but you have Christopher Lee in the first one and the leaders on the island. And they've both, like Neil had referred to this earlier, you don't know what their real intentions are. You don't know if they're really looking out for the people or if they're looking out for themselves. And in the second one, he'd mentioned that when he was asked about it, he said that he would be whatever he needed to be for those people, that he would, if he was Christian, he would be this, and if he was this religion, he would be that. So why do you bring that into your films, and what does that kind of person stand for to you?
Well, I think that side of the person is the classic religious leader. I mean, whether his ultimate belief is, say, Islam or Judaism or Christianity, he perhaps the kind of person who becomes a priest or a minister likes to cast himself in a kind of prophetic mold. I frankly have never done a study on this, and it might be quite interesting to do so. But the type of person who has the urge to be a priest or a minister, perhaps that is part of the equipment in his psyche which drives him in that direction. The need to be a bit of a prophet, the need to be a teacher, the need to be, but at the same time, being prepared to convey the things he wants to convey to his congregation by using some of what he knows to be their likes and dislikes and prejudices and so on, and to cast these thoughts in ways that they find acceptable.
Now, Wrath of Gods actually has a campaign on IndieGoGo to help raise funds for this. Now, is that to cover the whole movie, or is it to cover the specific things that are mentioned?
It's just to cover the steampunk and the building of the ship.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Why was that brought into the film? I understand that this is a modern thing that's going on, but was it brought in to attract an audience, or is it something you've seen and become fascinated in?
Well, clearly we want to attract an audience for the film ultimately, but we want to draw attention to the fact that, we want to raise money for these rather arcane objects that are not part of the normal properties of props of the average film, and some of them need a certain amount of scientific invention. Some of them need design and work on by artists. For instance, steampunk is frequently the subject of the work of jewelers, people who are used to working in precious metals and so on. So all that involves time, and time, as we all know, it involves money. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to have a chance to develop these things because I'm rather intrigued by that whole art form before we actually got to start to make the film. Film will be financed in the conventional ways that one can. We have various schemes in this country, as you do in yours, for raising money for films. We don't have big rich studios like you do, who can just write a check. We have to do it in a rather more complicated way. And so new form of venture capitalism, which I suppose is what you could call crowdfunding. I mean, it's a form of venture capitalism. Mm-hmm. It's usually done on a very small scale. And that's what we are doing for a particular purpose. I must confess that I was intrigued to see how well it worked for us and whether it could be used on a bigger scale. I think on the whole it will tend to be, in my untutored opinion, used on small ventures and causes rather than very big ones, because it means that the average person can, just put in $5 or $10 or whatever it is that they can easily afford to lose, but for something that intrigues them. Mm-hmm. And I think I rather like the idea of that. There's no real danger to that pocket in being involved, and financiers and banks and things can be left to do the larger financing, which is necessary in films, in the actual film itself.
And there's a lot of great incentives on the IndieGoGo page, posters, autographs, DVDs, and whatnot. So, like you said, you can give a small amount, but you're still going to get something out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And about the steampunk, the more I thought about it, I think it's kind of a nice connect to the big story of the movie, because the big story is taking something ancient and making something new with it. And that's kind of what steampunk is, taking something old but making something new with it.
Yeah.
Well, when did you hear about steampunk?
Well, there was a big exhibition of it at the Bodleian, which is an important museum in Oxford, part of the university. And I saw that, and I was very impressed with it indeed. I find it very intriguing. Mm-hmm. Of course, all the objects don't actually involve steam.
Yes.
I mean, steam obviously is about the age of steam in the middle of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it would be fun to actually add steam, real steam,
Mm-hmm.
to some of the objects.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we are planning to do.
Yeah. Let's say the posters, they're beautiful on the
The woodcuts.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
great.
Richard
Well, I'm
Wells.
I'm glad you're speaking about those because I'm hoping that they will sell like the proverbial hotcakes because I think they're lovely.
They are.
And what I really like about them is the artist has so cleverly found little incidents in the films and put them into the design. So instead of having a classic movie poster where you have a great big series of actors' heads, you know, you've got all sorts of little bits and pieces of the film itself. In the Rolls shots, you can see the steam motorcycle going along the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like cave paintings or other ancient arts where people did stone carvings of things, and this is what they did, or Egyptian works of art where they have all these different little stories going on through the entire thing.
Yes, it is. It is, and I think that's intriguing. We're looking at a poster. I mean, to be fair, it is a work of art, really, and I'm hoping that people will see it that way because I can see framing 3 of those and putting them in my study or somewhere.
I agree totally. They're absolutely beautiful, and it really stands out because it's very unique.
Yes. Well, I'm very glad you mentioned that.
I really do like them. I also noticed on the video that you do your own art for the storyboards.
Yes.
And do you have any like art that people can see?
Well, they can see my storyboards, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I was trained as an artist in Paris years ago, and I studied under Matisse and Fernand Léger. In those days, they had ateliers in Paris, and I'm talking about the early 50s. It was the United States' finest hour, in my opinion. Marshall aid to help Europe recover, and the GI Bill of Rights for veterans of the American armies who had the right to go to school almost anywhere in the world and study almost anything they liked to think of. And I remember I roomed in Paris with 3 Americans who were all learning to be chefs at the Cordon Bleu.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there was a great shortage of chefs. And the salaries paid for a Cordon Bleu chef was very high. They probably made a lot more money than their friends who went off to be lawyers. So it was an intriguing time, and my problem was that I'm a figurative artist, as you can see, and that was the moment when abstract impressionism ruled the roost. And if you didn't just throw scrambled eggs and tomato ketchup at a canvas and call it art, you see how retrograde I am, but drew people and could draw, you couldn't get arrested. And abstract impressionism never really interested me. I don't really mean to be rude about it because I think much of it is very beautiful. I'm not really a colorist. I'm a drawer. I like drawing. And I like shapes and that sort of thing. I'm not particularly good at color as a painter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the background. For a filmmaker, to be able to draw what you want to see, your camera person, or even sometimes for your actors and for your costumer, is an extraordinary gift because, you can be sure you're going to get what you want to see, or pretty near. Whereas if you have to explain it and simply wave your arms around, you're not so likely to get what you really need. I mean, Hitchcock had other people draw for him, but he supervised them very carefully. And he always had things drawn very carefully indeed. And of course his scripts were based on whole books that he produced of where he thought there should be a staircase and where he thought there should be a window, all those sort of details that he thought his decorators should put in their scripts. The art directors actually provide for him when he went on set.
Now, do you still have any work from when you might have storyboarded? Well, did you storyboard for the original film?
Yeah, for the Wicker Man, yes. Some of them get sold from time to time on eBay.
I was going to say, I would think that would be in pretty high demand from fans of the Wicker Man.
Yes, I'm afraid it is. Well, I'm afraid it is, yes.
If anyone wanted to buy those, where would they find them?
I think eBay would be a good place. I don't actually sell what remain of mine. In some cases, they're spoken for, I should say, for books that somebody's writing. He wants to use some of them in the book, so I'm holding them back to that.
Now, I didn't want to ask, what were your thoughts on the remake of Wicker Man?
Well, I have a theory, and I'll couple the remake of Sleuth. Do you know what I mean by Sleuth?
No.
Anthony Shaffer wrote a play called Sleuth, which was a quite a big success. It had Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier in the film version of it, and it ran for 3 years on Broadway and I don't know how many years in London. It was a theatre piece which was made into film. Anyway, it was remade about the same time as the Wicker Man was remade. And the Wicker Man was made with Nicolas Cage, as you know, and somebody called, I think, Neil LaBute wrote and directed it. In both cases, both films, the Pinter script on Sleuth and the Neil LaBute script on The Wicker Man, they went as far as they could, apart from the very basics of the plot, to produce an entirely new film. And these people are talented people. Neil LaBute is a talented theatre writer, stage writer, and Pinter, of course, had written some extraordinary plays in his time. I think they were cursed because they both produced the most awful versions. And Nicolas Cage, whom I regard as a very good character actor, an excellent character actor. I think he's done some very good things. Produced quite the worst performance of his life. And
what makes you say that?
Well,
you didn't like the scene with the bees?
Well, one where he goes rolling down in the gorilla suit or whatever it is. No, I think that my theory is right, that somewhere up there or down there, Anthony Shaffer sat and cast a curse on anyone remaking his work. And no matter how talented they were and all the other things they'd done, they really got it when they tried to remake his work. And as far as I was concerned, it was what the Germans called Schadenfreude.
Oh, yeah. Great word.
It's almost like the Wrath of the Gods.
Exactly.
Yes, if he was a god, he was
Yes.
everything but an earthquake.
We did have a couple questions from some fans on Facebook. I know Annabelle has one. I have one.
Paul Wiley, I'm not sure you recognize his name. He's been a huge guy trying to help get out the word on your Wrath of the Gods project. But he had a question. Why do you think The Wicker Tree received such a mixed reception?
Well, I don't know that it did. I received a great number of really wonderful responses from Twitter and some terrific reviews. Admittedly, I don't particularly search out the bad reviews, so I didn't read those. But I thought, considering you make any film which has a relationship to an earlier film, which was enormously well received, what are critics going to do? Are they going to say it's just as good as the previous one? No, they're not. They're going to say, well, of course, in comparison to the original, it was nothing like it. It was nothing like as good. But, of course, it was a very different film in its way. It was the same genre of film, but it had very different kinds of performances. It was about young people rather than middle-aged people and so on. I was very satisfied with the reception. I mean, in Canada, where we went to the Montreal Fantastic Film Festival, which is one of the major ones there, we got a standing ovation for about, 3 or 4 minutes.
Wow.
That film. And similar in London. I think journalists will be journalists, and they will always put down something which, for the lack of spending more time to think about what the film was actually about and what it was really like, is to say, well, it wasn't as good as the first.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, very, very rarely, I suppose someone says, oh, it was better than the first. Take a film like The Thomas Crown Affair.
Mm-hmm.
I thought The Thomas Crown Affair was one of the best American films I'd seen. I thought it was absolutely wonderful, the first one. And I thought the second one was almost better. I thought the second film was beautifully designed, marvelously acted, quite witty, and I loved it. And so there, I could have written, if I was a journalist, an appreciation of it, for the second one in its way, as full of praise as I would have for the first. But I'm not a journalist.
Jujubee, she said she was curious to what your religious, spiritual background was.
I was christened in the Church of England. I went to a Church of England school. I go to church maybe once a year and have done all my life. It's usually to hear the music at Wells Cathedral, which isn't far from where my house is in the country. I like church music. I think the language of the liturgy of the Church of England, which was, contemporaries of Shakespeare, is very beautiful, and I appreciate it. I like a lot of the music, and I go to church occasionally. We have a cathedral near where I am in the country, called Wells Cathedral, and we have a wonderful choir there, and I go sometimes on high days or holidays with my wife to listen to the choristers. So I'm afraid that's about it as far as my religion is concerned.
Yeah.
But comparative religion is another thing, of course.
Mm. You mentioned listening to choir and enjoying that, and I know in the first two films they both open up, and that's how they start. And I saw a piece on YouTube where you've got the female lead.
Oh, that's Halla. Yes, that is
Okay.
Bryn.
Okay.
Yes. She's
right.
Icelandic. She's Icelandic singing star and actress. And Halla Williams, her name is. Not only is she extraordinary looking, but she has a lovely voice and is a talented lady. And it's a good part.
And how it's so important, it seems so important for you to bring in the voice of your innocent victims. And is that going to play a major part in this third film?
My innocent victims, you mean in the case of Edward Wood in the first film?
Yes. And then in 2, you've got your 2 Texans.
Yes. Well, I think there's something horrific about their ending, and I feel very strongly about the intolerance that religion can produce. I mean, take all these dreadful beheadings that are going on in Syria right now. And that sort of aspect of religion is, to me, very repugnant. And I think in a film which it discusses to any degree comparative religion, it is important to make a statement about that. And the killing of the innocents is one way to do it.
Will there be obviously there'll be music of some sort, but will there be similar music from the first 2 movies in this film?
Yes, there will. There'll be. Remember, we've moved from the Celtic world to the Norse world.
Mm.
The Celts were all across Ireland, Wales, Britain, France, Spain, all the way into Hungary. And then sort of north of that, parts of Germany and Scandinavia and so on and so forth, to get the Norse world and the Norse gods. And, of course, Wagner used the Norse gods' stories as the basis for the Ring Cycle, his great series of operas. And The Wrath of the Gods is a slight variation, as a title at least, from The Twilight of the Gods, which is the last opera in the Ring Cycle. Mm. And the 2 principal characters are Brunhilde, or Bryn as I call her in the film, and Siegfried, the great warrior figure in the Ring Cycle operas. But I'm not very serious about that. It's just that there are really glancing references to anchor the film in some of its original atmosphere, if you like.
I don't want you to give too much away of the movie, obviously, but you said how the Wrath of the Gods will be through volcanoes and natural disasters, basically. Will the actual gods be cast too, or is it going to be primarily seen through the disasters?
That I cannot tell you.
All right.
Because it has to do with the plot.
Excellent.
And I'm afraid you'll have to wait for the film.
Yes. Yeah, we want to be surprised as well.
Yeah, good. I'm sorry, but I think I'd be very frank about everything else. But,
yeah, no. Yeah. I totally understand. And I really am looking forward to seeing it.
Good. Mm-hmm. Good. I'm looking forward to making it.
What is your timeline to start?
Well, I want it to be a winter film. So I plan to shoot it over parts of the winter. It is a film that I can break up the sequences, and instead of doing the standard 8 or 12 weeks solidly in a particular studio or location. I can shoot a bit of it here and a bit of it there and put all the bits together. There are budgetary advantages to doing that, and also artistic advantages too, I think. And so, since my locations are not all in the same place by any means, I can split it up in that way. And I hope to shoot some of it before Christmas and quite a lot of it afterwards.
It's interesting that you have, you've got Mayday as a major part and, essential part in your films. And now you're moving into winter. It'd be nice if we could get fall in there, too.
Well, you never know.
Yes, exactly. Well, we'll let everyone know that you can go to IndieGoGo and search for Wrath of Gods, and we'll have the link right next to this interview, so you'll be able to click on it and find it easier. And so not only can people listening, they can go and exactly like you said, just give a little bit, and you'll be part of helping make this movie happen.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The link. Which link is that?
It's IndieGoGo.com/projects. I will say a lot of the crowdfunding sites should get a little better with their links because they're hard to tell someone. It's easier to show someone, but it's IndieGoGo.com/projects/the Wrath of the Gods, but it's a dash between. Yeah, it's a very long
bad.
one.
This one, the Wrath of if you just do the Wrath of the Gods, and there's a hyphen between each one of those words, so it's the hyphen.
I see. So it's not too difficult to find.
No. Especially, if you just go to IndieGoGo.com and search for Wrath of the Gods, it's very easy to find.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can go check out your guys' Facebook page, and there's all kinds of updates all the time there.
Good. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Good. Me too.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Hello, this is Graham Humphreys. I'm an illustrator based in the UK, in London. And my career began with The Evil Dead for Sam Raimi. And it continues now. And I'm enjoying doing lots of very horrible things with paint.